The Michael Berry Show.
We talked to Luke Macias earlier in the week about the state legislative session that just concluded. And I told you at the time that this was one of three discussions we would be having. The other would be with Brandon Waltons of Texas Scorecard, and the final with the grand poobah of Texas Scorecard, Michael Quinn Sullivan, whose coverage of the state legislature through Texas Scorecard is, in my opinion, unrivaled and the best. I read it daily. It's wonderful. And he is our guest. Michael, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be with you, my friend.
I will tell you.
Your opening monologue. That was, we need more common sense, particularly if you think about these issues of life and death of people thousands of miles away. And I so appreciated getting to hear that. We need a lot more thoughtful discussions here, and I appreciate it.
Well, Michael Quinn Sullivan, as you know, I am less worried about how people come down on an issue, how they conclude what they decide, and more worried that people be presented with enough information and that the conversation be open. It is the idea that you close conversation by suggesting that anyone who dares have it is a bad person. That's how you get to bad results. Michael Quinn Sullivan, Texas Scorecard, who does wonderful work following the state legislative session. So let's talk broadly, and then we'll get more granular. We'll narrow. How would you describe, I think most of our listeners probably align with your views on what we want for our state, not our party, not any individual, but our state, our children, our schools, our streets, our homes, our taxes. How would you describe this session for folks who believe as you and I do?
Yeah, this was a legislative session that in some ways kind of reverted to the mean of the early 2000s, where some good things were done, some dumb things were done, and there were a lot of missed opportunities. And I think that Republicans are now hitting middle age as it relates to running state government in Texas. We have now been, it's been 1994 was the last time a Democrat was elected statewide in Texas. And so, we can no longer say, well, we're still trying to figure things out. No, you're graying and you're getting a bald spot, right? You're no longer a kid, which was kind of an excuse given at various points when Republicans didn't get things done. And I think the very practical governance that people expect is where I think there have been some missed opportunities, whether you're talking about property taxes, talking about maybe some bail reform issues, some various things that affect people's real lives every day. And that's where I think for Republicans, for the state, I feel like we've kind of missed the mark in that we end up talking about very highfalutin topics, and we sometimes forget that there are 30 million real people whose lives are impacted today. It's not an esoteric discussion. Real lives are affected today by the actions that are or are not taken. I think that sometimes our politicians have been missing out on that.
I really like, I'm an analogy guy, and I find that the parables of the Bible help me understand concepts far better, perhaps, than a more direct assertion. I find allegory to be useful, analogy to be useful, anecdotes to be useful. I love your description of the Republican Party as this sort of living being who has achieved an age and where he is. That's an interesting way to present that. Let's talk to begin with, because you've been very involved over the years. In fact, even personally involved. Let's talk about the defeat, the fall of Drunk Dade as Speaker and his session individually. And then let's get into, if you would, Dustin Burrows and how that happened and go from there.
Yeah, so, Dade Phelan just made a royal mess of the Texas House, enough so that his fatal flaw as Speaker of the House was that the Speaker of the House, whether a Republican or a Democrat, whatever the majorities are, The job of the Speaker of the House, the unwritten job, the most important job, is to make sure that the incumbent members don't lose elections. Making sure that those incumbent members can pass the local bills, can have the resolutions honoring JV soccer teams, whatever. And Dade Phelan made a mess of that. He made a mess of that both operationally in the House. He made a mess of it as he pushed this weird vendetta against Ken Paxton. Made a mess of it by sticking his finger in the eye of the governor on school choice, just issue after issue after issue. Dade Phelan put members of the House in harm's way politically, and including himself. You think back of like Tom Craddock, the first Republican speaker who has literally been in the Texas legislature since before man walked on the moon, and he's still in the legislature. Right. He will be in the legislature long after you and I are, die of old age and our grandchildren are voting. I mean, the guy is just a force of nature in Texas politics. And he always made sure people got to get things done. Dade Phelan did not. Dade Phelan put people in harm's way. Dade Phelan ended up almost losing his own election. No way he was going to be Speaker. No one wanted him, and they had to replace him. And that's how we ended up with Dustin Burrows.
And we'll talk about that, what was passed, what wasn't, and why property taxes never seem to matter. Coming up.
Hey, what it do is Paul Wilder, People's Champion. Right now you're listening to The Michael Berry Show.
The state legislature does not get very much coverage. You know what's going on to a large degree in Washington because Fox News nationalized political coverage. So whether you live in Idaho, Vermont, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, you find out what Nancy Pelosi and now Mike Johnson and those folks are up to. Because it's sort of like when you watch a game and they say, Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. Well, there are a few other people playing this game, but it makes it easier to hype this thing and to cover this thing. So the state legislature operates largely in the dark because the economies of scale aren't there. The newspapers have cut back their staffing. KTRH actually used to have an Austin bureau. It made sense to do that. It doesn't anymore. But it used to be the case that even our home station would send reporters up to live in Austin during the session. So as more and more newspapers have pulled back from primary coverage and radio stations, you have less and less coverage, and the old line, democracy dies in darkness. Well, bad things happen when there is no transparency. The great Louis Brandeis famously said, sunlight's the best disinfectant. So it's very important that people like Michael Quinn Sullivan do what he does, and that's why I encourage the work that he does. Michael Quinn Sullivan is our guest. Michael, let's talk about Dustin Burrows, who was one of Drunk Dade's top lieutenants. When Drunk Dade gets pushed out, the lobby always wins. They just replaced him with somebody just like him. How would you compare the Burrows session to previous Drunk Dade sessions, knowing that 60 Democrats gathered together and pulled a few Republicans over so that basically the Democrats control the House, and that's what we're left with? How would you describe Burrows' leadership style and what happened in comparison to what we knew of Drunk Dade?
Yeah, so during this legislative session, I was as critical, maybe more so than most, on not only the process employed by Burrows to become Speaker, but was very suspicious of what he would then end up delivering. So with that as context, he ended up the session delivering more wins for conservatives than I thought he would be able to deliver. Now, that's not to say this was a conservative session. That's not to say big wins, but it is to say that compared to the last 10, 15 years, between Dade Phelan and Dennis Bonnen and Joe Strauss, he did have the best session of any of them. That's a low bar. Your miniature dachshund could jump over that bar kind of bar, but it is something significant. So he did deliver more things than I thought possible on school choice, on a variety of issues. He did fulfill kind of some very basic Republican promises. Now we can quibble over whether or not we like the school choice bill and other things, but the fact is he did deliver on those things as well. And he led a lot of the conservative, the guys who voted against him and loudly voted against him. He made sure that, unlike Drunk Dade, that they were able to pass legislation important to their districts, important to their own reelection efforts. So you do have to recognize that he did better than Dade Phelan.
I do.
Again,
yeah, no, you're right.
You got to recognize the bar.
That's a
you
very
got to
good
recognize
point.
the bar.
Well, look, I read your stuff literally every day. I feel like, it's funny when people meet me and they finish my sentences, and it's weird to me because if you listen every day, you become your own version of AI. You know how I think. I know how you think. I know you are a student of history, and I know that you study things like power and how it is wielded far beyond the personalities that attempt to wield it. And that is a very good point. I don't know Dustin Burrows. I declared war on him over the way that he was elected by the Democrats and how the Republicans allowed that to happen. But you're right. Those are the sorts of things. And, Trump has a great skill, and that is he's very transactional in his affection. He can turn it on and off as he needs it. And he has an incredible ability to make friends out of former enemies. And so if Dustin Burrows is going to do things like that, that's going to inure to his benefit. And that's an interesting point that I had not considered, if even noticed at all. Let's talk about wins and losses. But first, I want to go back. There was an instance a few years ago, which is where you really came to my attention, where you kind of exposed what Dennis Bonnen was up to. And I think there was a recording involved. I don't know all the stories, but that was where you really came on my radar as a guy who was incredibly involved in all this. All by way of saying this isn't the first, it's been going on for decades, that the Democrats in the minority have effectively been choosing our Republican speaker.
Right. And look at and that will continue. And in some ways, I'm a broken record. That will continue until we, as the voters, say that we've had enough. And we many of us will pay lip service to. I don't like the fact that Republicans continue to let Democrats drive the bus. But then we turn right around and we reelect our incumbent members of the legislature, who are the ones who've been letting the Democrats drive the bus. Until enough of us say enough is enough. Until enough of us say enough is enough. Too many enoughs in that one sentence. Only then will things start to change. Only then will Republicans start to control the Texas legislature. And then I think that's where each one of us has to own our responsibility in that. And that's where I have to give some kudos to the Republican Party chairman, Abraham George, who is now pushing forward with something that might actually make that happen. That's closing the Republican primary. Now, the state legislature isn't doing that. The state government doesn't want to do it. But Abraham George and the Republican Party are setting aside money to fight this, to ensure that going in 2026, only Republicans can vote in Republican primaries. That will go some distance in making the reality of us as voters saying we've had enough of this deal making with Democrats in Austin.
I have a friend named Rachel Palmer Hooper, who is one of those people who works behind the scenes and other people get credit for, who's general counsel of the state party, and she has been on the warpath for this issue. And it's the sort of thing that the average voter doesn't notice. And you don't know how these things happen, because you have to go to entire weekends of very, 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 very boring and tedious Republican Party platform meetings and making motions and all that. But somebody has to do this, right? And I ain't the one to do it. And the candidates and the office holders ain't the one to do it. But if this is done, I think you are right. I think it has the potential to change the people that we get elected. Because why on earth should we be allowing – parties aren't the government. They're a creation of man, not an outgrowth of government. They're not a legal, constitutional, entity the way the government should be. And why shouldn't we choose who's going to pick our candidates? And why shouldn't we prevent the Democrats from picking our candidates in much the same way that we've allowed that to happen in the state legislature? Michael Quinn Sullivan is our guest, TexasScorecard.com. Lots to talk about with this legislative session, and we will continue that conversation coming up. I encourage you to go to TexasScorecard.com and subscribe. You'll love the stuff he covers.
People's champ, what's up, baby? Right now, you are tuned in to the Michael Berry Show. Keep it locked right here. More truth on the way. More honest opinions coming at you right here, only on the Michael Berry Show.
Reform advocate says Texas' new laws are improving child protective services. Brandon Waltons, who will be our guest, I think, tomorrow, with a story, Texas GOP legislature must finish work on key conservative reforms. Report card, how did Texas lawmakers do supporting medical liberty? Texas lawmakers respond to parents demanding protections for children. Video, children attend Dallas drag show. Texas Education Agency calls new STAR results for grades 3 through 8 encouraging. Left-wing groups fight against termination of in-state tuition for illegal aliens. Former Houston water official receives July parole review despite 10-year sentence. Alleged non-citizen voters under investigation by the Texas Attorney General. Key election security efforts met resistance in the Texas House. Michael Quinn Sullivan, let's talk about that. As the publisher of Texas Scorecard, Real News for Real Texans, you call it, those key security efforts meeting resistance, that is a great frustration of mine. My wife was Secretary of State a little over 10 years ago, and I really dove into election integrity at the time. That was the year 2014 of the election integrity bill that gave the voter ID bill. And it was her mission to travel to 254 counties and explain everybody can vote. Nobody is being disenfranchised. It's very easy. There are 7 forms of identification, 6 of them government issued. The 7th, if you don't have one, your local DPS will give you one. And that actually increased voter turnout because people want to vote when they believe our elections matter. What went wrong with the election integrity efforts in this session?
Yeah, so what went wrong was the Texas House not being interested in passing some of the, some things get really nitty gritty, right? Your wife and 9 other people can probably, follow the ins and outs, but they affect 30 million of us, right? The nitty gritty is where either good things or bad things happen in public policy. Mm-hmm. And now some of these things are very easy for us to get. The most notable being whether or not the Attorney General of Texas can prosecute election fraud. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals took that right away from the Attorney General several years ago, to the surprise of former Attorney General Greg Abbott and John Cornyn, who had prosecuted such crimes when they were AGs, but they took that away, and so now you're left with local district attorneys prosecuting local election fraud allegations and claims, which there sometimes creates a conflict of interest there, and so the Texas House refused to go along with the Texas Senate in restoring that ability of bringing that kind of accountability, the outside accountability needed to clean up elections. Other things dealt with kind of the procedures that would be used for auditing elections. Again, some of these things get kind of nerdy, but yet these are, again, this is the nuts and bolts of governance. I think many of us, you mentioned at the outset, we get so fixated on what did Nancy Pelosi say about some country we'll never visit. And yet we ignore the very practical governance of our state and our cities and our counties. Our founding fathers did not intend it that way. Our founding fathers intended for the real power of government to be closest to the people, where the most practical damage or harm can be done to an individual, to be local. And they intended us to be focused on that, to be involved in our government day in and day out. And sadly, for the last few decades, we've all been really busy entertaining ourselves into a stupor rather than being engaged as citizens. And that's what we try to do, is help folks be more engaged as citizens.
Michael Quinn Sullivan of TexasScorecard.com is our guest. The China land ban, Senate Bill 17, I believe it was, did pass. What does that do?
Yes. Oh, this is perhaps the single most important win of the legislative session. It now prohibits individuals from hostile foreign countries, those agents, those companies, those individuals who are not, in the process of becoming Americans, not in the process of becoming citizens, from owning property and resources in the United States. That includes China. That includes North Korea and Iran and Russia right now, all based on lists from the National Security Agency and others. So this is important legislation for securing Texas. We've seen this trend. We reported on it in a documentary a couple of years ago.
Yep.
The trend of China buying land around military bases here in Texas and around the country, buying land up near very important critical infrastructure like electrical power plants and other things. So making sure that doesn't happen, giving the Attorney General the power to go and investigate, prosecute, and even when necessary, remove that land from individuals. Texas will now, when this goes into effect on September 1st, Texas will now have the strongest law in the country. That's significant. That was legislation that Dade Phelan would not allow to be heard and debated in the Texas House just 2 years ago. Clearly, both Speaker Burrows and the Republican and even some Democrats recognized that this is the people are really concerned about the kind of access we're giving our literal avowed enemies into our nation. This is a big win for national security and something Texas is leading on.
It's you follow what Israel has done inside Iran. And the level of penetration and infiltration is unprecedented. I don't recall anything in world history on this level where they infiltrated the highest ranks of the Iranian government. I think some of the generals had to be in on it and on the take, and I think that's some of the folks they killed to prevent them from telling how it all came about. But it's incredible how Israel was able on foot to execute drone strikes on Iranian soil, how they were able to set up weaponry to destroy Fordow or parts of Fordow. And you go, well, when you see how that can happen, and you look at our own national defense, why would we allow the Chinese government to own land next to our military installations? If that doesn't tell you how dangerous a game this is, I don't know what does. Michael Quinn Sullivan, can you hang with us for a few more minutes?
Oh, I'd be honored to.
Okay. Michael Quinn Sullivan of TexasScorecard.com coming up. He was on the ground at the protests of the terrorists last week and was filming and reporting as he did so. Michael, how was that terrorist activity different than you expected it to be going in?
Well, it was different than certainly what we'd seen in other parts of the country, where the weak police presence, driven by the politicians' dictates, meant that people were doing very untoward things. You certainly saw in Austin, in Houston, in Dallas, you saw individuals who showed up hoping that they could replicate the vibe of L.A., hoping they could cause mayhem. But yet, between the local law enforcement, Texas Department of Public Safety, and the National Guard, those folks quickly got the message that simply wasn't going to be tolerated in the Lone Star State. I was in Austin for those protests, and I just have to say I never thought I would sing the praises of the Austin Police Department the way I found myself talking to my colleagues on the ground, and then with friends later. Just the professionalism displayed by the men and women of the Austin PD and the Texas Department of Public Safety was like nothing I've ever seen before. One, making it very clear they weren't going to put up with nonsense, but also not taking the jibes. They were just, men and women doing their job. And it was very refreshing to see, we all developed kind of a cartoon image of our head of how people are supposed to be, right? And sometimes we have to be willing to accept reality. And the reality is in Texas, we have a lot of really wonderful men and women who just put on a uniform every day and say, you know what, I want to make my community peaceful today, and that's what they do. And I got to see that in real time. It was nice to see.
It was, and I agree. You were in the thick of it, but I've watched it from a distance. My brother was a cop for over 30 years, and some of those guys, they want to. They're sheepdogs, right? A lot of them served in the military. They come home, they continue to serve. A lot of them want to get in between the bad guys and the weak. A lot of them believe in the rule of law, and some of them, it's a job, and they could get hired, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And they want to go home to their families, and it's very frustrating to me how bad this whole nonsense. You can get away with horrible crimes as long as you call yourself a protester. I don't buy that nonsense. Michael Quinn Sullivan, I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to ask you to react to it as to whether you think that's true, and then what you think about it if it is. And the statement goes like this. Greg Abbott has always wanted to be president. I knew Greg Abbott when he was in Houston. He's always desperately done everything he possibly can to be president. He's one of these guys that's a stepping stone guy all the way up. Everything he ever does is for that next office, and the end goal is to be president. And he had hoped to be president by now, but of course that didn't happen. He wants to be president. He wants to run in 2028, and everything he's done this legislative session has been to set him up with the wins he thinks he needs to get there. In order to do that, he decided that school vouchers would be something that he could sell to the nation as, I'm a guy that got this done. I care about kids. In order to do that, he had to declare war on some of Drunk Dade's lieutenants who were working against him. He had to devote all the political capital he had to get it done. I don't like the effort that came out of it because it's not what I wanted to see, but it is a win for him on paper, and that's how he'll perceive it. I mean, that's how he'll sell it. However, I've been told that a meeting was held by Burrows with the Republican caucus that said, if we vote for this, if we pass it, Abbott has the commitment of Trump, and maybe Trump was on a phone call, that he will endorse every single state rep next year for re-election, for voting for this, no matter what else you do this session. And that gave them carte blanche to act like fools, to never get property taxes done, to do all the other things they did. And it was all sold out for a Trump endorsement in their re-election for candidates that Trump never would have endorsed otherwise. Is all of that true?
I think there are certainly bits and pieces of that are very accurate.
Well, that's better than my usual track record, so I'll take it.
Yeah, you just made that up. No, I think I think your end analysis is the most important thing, which is you had a lot of folks think that by delivering on Governor Abbott's school choice, and whatever you think of it, for 30 years Republicans have promised school choice. They finally have something that's school choice, right? Whether they like the details or not, they did deliver on that. The fact of the matter, though, is that it presumes that the electorate are a bunch of lemmings who, we got school choice, I don't have to worry about anything else. Donald Trump endorsed, I don't have to worry about anything else. And I think that there is some more nuance. I think that Texans do have other issues they care about than just school choice. At the end of the day, the school choice program is going to affect 100,000 families, right? At most 100,000 families, which means the 3 to 4 million kids who are in public schools might see a little bit out of it, not much, right? So you've got to do something to affect those folks as well. So I think that the false promise, which reportedly was made, the promise that if you vote for this, Donald Trump will endorse you, a lot of legislators took that as kind of carte blanche. What Donald Trump has made clear over the years is until he posts something on Truth Social, there ain't no endorsement. And you've seen a couple of these members already pushing out this claim that they have an endorsement, but there's nothing on Truth Social. And if they're not careful, if they run too far with that, they're going to get something worse than not an endorsement. They're going to get a slap down on Truth Social, which is something no Republican incumbent state rep wants if they've got a primary challenge. But the bigger problem, though, is not that specific political problem, but the problem of they thought by delivering that, they don't have to deliver on these other priorities of the Republican Party, these other priorities of grassroots activists, these other priorities of their precinct chairs. The most notable of which is, in the same way for 30 years, they've been talking about school choice. For 30 years, Michael, we've had Republicans talk about reducing and even eliminating all or most of our property tax burden, and yet once again, we didn't get that done this legislative session. I think
and they're
for
not
many
committed
Texans, that represents a gut punch to a lot of people.
And I'll tell you, Galveston is seeing a buyer's market, they're calling it, which is a nice way of saying a devaluation of properties and property values, and the market is going to reflect that. And I think that is in large part because of Galveston's high taxes. And if that doesn't change, Republicans are eventually going to have to pay the cost of that. Michael Quinn Sullivan, you're fantastic. Keep up the great work.
The Michael Berry Show continues.